Welcome to Top 10 Secret, the channel that unravels the most chilling mysteries. Today, we'll dive into the top 10 haunted queen stories. Tales that are terrifying, spine-chilling, and deeply haunting. From wandering spirits in ancient castles to the dark curses of powerful queens, get ready for a journey into a shadowy world you never imagined. Story 1. The Legend of the Bone Queen. The legend of the Bone Queen has haunted sailors for generations. The story is not merely a warning, but a terror that seeps into the soul of anyone who hears it. On moonless nights, when the sea grows eerily calm, some swear they can hear her mournful song carried by the wind, bringing with it the chill of death. But few know the tale behind her grotesque appearance and fearsome presence. It is a tragedy that chills the spine and leaves a lasting scar. This is the story of Isolde, the forgotten maiden cursed by the sea, who now roams as an eternal nightmare upon the endless waves. Isolde was born into a wealthy family in the port town of Lindhaven, once a bustling center of trade. Her father, Captain Aldrich, was a cold and greedy man, caring for nothing but gold and power. Isolde's mother had passed away when she was young, leaving her alone with a heart full of loneliness. Isolde grew up as a solitary flower within the gray stone castle of her father. Her beauty was breathtaking. Golden hair like sunlight, skin as pale and smooth as porcelain, and sorrowful blue eyes that mirrored the depths of the ocean. But her beauty was also her curse. She was confined within the cold walls, forbidden to step outside, as her father feared she would become a target for those seeking to exploit his fortune. One rare day, when she was allowed to visit the harbor, Isolde met Adric, a young sailor. Adric was a wanderer with nothing but an old ship and a yearning for freedom upon the sea. Their love blossomed through secret conversations and longing glances. But when Aldrich discovered their romance, he flew into a rage. Adric was brutally beaten, and Isolde was imprisoned in her chamber, where only a faint ray of sunlight through a small window kept her company. Unwilling to accept her fate, Isolde and Adric devised a plan to escape. On a stormy night, under a pitch-black sky, they fled the castle and boarded Adric's small vessel. They intended to cross the sea to a land where no one knew them, where they could start a new life together. But the sea is no sanctuary for fugitives. As soon as they set sail, a violent storm descended upon them. The waves, like giant hands, tore the small vessel apart. Isolde and Adric were separated amidst the chaos. Her screams echoed in the darkness, but there was no answer. When the last light faded, Isolde sank into the cold, merciless depths of the ocean, clutching the pendant Adric had given her. But Isolde did not die. Her soul was ensnared by an ancient force dwelling in the depths of the sea. This entity, known as the Keeper of the Abyss, had heard her desperate cries. Yet the aid of such a being is never free. To survive, Isolde had to forfeit her humanity. She was reborn, but not as a human. Her golden hair was now entwined with seaweed and shells. Her once blue eyes became hollow voids, dark as the ocean abyss. Her porcelain skin stretched taut over jagged bones. The dress she wore was stitched from rotting fabric, adorned with human bones. She became the Bone Queen, a spectral figure ruling over shipwrecks and lost souls adrift at sea. Yet deep within her frozen heart, her love and pain for Adric endured, transforming her into a being both terrifying and tragic. The Bone Queen first appeared on the merchant ship, Elysium. Sailors recounted that the sea grew unnaturally still that night. A gaunt, towering figure emerged on the ship's bow, her hollow eyes glowing with an eerie green light. She sang a mournful melody, hauntingly beautiful yet terrifyingly compelling. When her song ended, the entire crew vanished, leaving the ship adrift, its decks stained with blood. Rumors claimed their souls were absorbed into the bone pendant she wore, becoming part of her ghostly entourage. The story spread rapidly, deterring anyone from sailing on moonless nights. Yet, not all were afraid. A group of daring sailors, led by Captain Graham, vowed to hunt her down and avenge the lives she had taken. They tracked her to a cursed expanse of sea where shipwrecks floated like dead islands. But when they confronted her, they realized their grave mistake. The Bone Queen was not merely a ghost. She was the embodiment of the ocean, wielding powers beyond comprehension. Her storm consumed the entire crew, leaving Graham alive but forever mad after witnessing her. It is said that if you hear the Bone Queen's song, your fate is sealed. Her voice is a siren's call, inviting you to the other side, laced with sorrow and the ocean's curse. The souls she captures never find peace. They drift eternally in darkness, serving her as spectral entities, dragging more unfortunate souls into the depths. Yet some whisper that if one is brave enough to confront her and touch the bone pendant she wears, they can free the trapped souls, including Isolde herself. However, no one has ever survived to confirm this. And so, the legend of the Bone Queen continues to haunt those who dare to challenge the vast and merciless sea. You might want to keep your lights burning on long nights at sea, for in the darkness, her song may be waiting for you. Story 2: Nightmare of the Mushroom Forest. In the heart of a forgotten valley lies a forest so dense and foreboding that no one dares to venture into its depths. The villagers call it the Nightmare Forest, for those who enter rarely return, and those who do come back are forever changed, their minds fractured, mumbling incoherent stories of glowing mushrooms, sinister whispers, and the haunting figure of a maiden with luminous eyes. It is said that she is not human, but a wraith bound to the forest, her essence entwined with the strange fungi that flourish there. Her gaze can pierce the soul, her voice can bend the will of even the strongest, and her laughter echoes like the tolling of a funeral bell. This is the legend of the Glowing Maiden, a tale steeped in tragedy, horror, and the grotesque beauty of decay. Long ago, before the forest became a place of dread, it was known for its vibrant array of mushrooms, many of which were said to possess mystical properties. Healers and alchemists traveled from far and wide to gather its bounty. Among them was a young woman named Lyria, known for her unparalleled knowledge of fungi. Her beauty was as captivating as her intellect, hair as dark as midnight, eyes that shimmered like emeralds, and a smile that could disarm even the most guarded of hearts. Lyria lived on the edge of the forest, in a cottage surrounded by a garden of rare herbs and flowers. Despite her skills, she was an outcast in the village, feared and envied in equal measure. They whispered that she dabbled in forbidden arts, that her beauty was unnatural, and that her remedies sometimes came at a terrible cost. But Lyria paid them no mind, for her heart belonged to the forest and its secrets. One fateful autumn, a nobleman from a distant land arrived in the village, seeking a cure for his ailing wife. Desperate and willing to pay any price, he begged Lyria for her help. Moved by his plight, she ventured deep into the forest, further than she had ever gone before, in search of the elusive midnight cap, a mushroom said to bloom only under the light of a blood moon. The blood moon bathed the forest in an eerie crimson glow as Lyria navigated the twisting paths, her lantern casting flickering shadows. The deeper she went, the stranger the forest became. The air grew heavy with a sweet, cloying scent, and the mushrooms around her began to glow faintly, their colors pulsating like a heartbeat. After hours of searching, she found it, the midnight cap, its cap a deep black with veins of fiery red. But as she reached out to pluck it, the ground beneath her feet shifted. Roots and vines erupted from the earth, ensnaring her legs and pulling her down. Her lantern shattered, plunging her into darkness. A voice, soft and melodic, filled the air. "Why do you disturb my sanctuary, mortal?" Lyria struggled, her breath hitching as a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a woman, but not entirely. Her skin was pale and luminous, her hair a cascade of glowing mushrooms, and her eyes, two orbs of incandescent blue, seemed to peer into Lyria's very soul. "I mean no harm," Lyria whispered. "I seek only the midnight cap to save a life." The figure tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "A life for a life, then," she murmured. "Will you pay the price?" Before Lyria could respond, the vines tightened, thorns piercing her skin. Her scream was swallowed by the forest, and everything went black. When Lyria awoke, she was no longer herself. Her body felt different, lighter, colder, and yet pulsing with an unnatural vitality. Looking down, she saw that her hands were no longer flesh, but a delicate lattice of fungal growths. Her reflection in a nearby pool revealed the truth. She had become one with the forest. Her hair was now a crown of glowing mushrooms. Her eyes radiated an otherworldly light, and her once human form was adorned with intricate fungal patterns. The voice returned, echoing in her mind. "You are mine now, child of the forest. Serve me, and you shall know eternity." At first, Lyria resisted. She tried to leave the forest, but every step away from its heart brought excruciating pain. The villagers who saw her fled in terror, their screams piercing the night. Consumed by despair and rage, she returned to the forest, where the voice welcomed her back with a chilling embrace. Over time, Lyria became the forest's guardian, her humanity eroded by the centuries. She lured wanderers into her domain, their life force feeding the mushrooms that thrived in the darkness. Those who dared to harm the forest met gruesome fates, their bodies consumed and transformed into grotesque fungal sculptures. The villagers' fear of the forest grew, and they began to offer sacrifices to appease the glowing maiden. They left offerings of food, trinkets, and even their own children at the forest's edge. Some were spared, but others were taken, their fates unknown. One day, a group of travelers arrived in the village, hearing whispers of the forest's horrors. Among them was a scholar named Elric, who sought to uncover the truth behind the legend. Armed with ancient texts and alchemical tools, he ventured into the forest with a small band of mercenaries. Elric and his companions were prepared for danger, but nothing could have prepared them for the sights that awaited. The trees seemed alive, their bark pulsating with a sickly light. Mushrooms of impossible size and color glowed like lanterns, their spores filling the air with a heady, intoxicating aroma. Whispers echoed all around them, and the mercenaries began to falter, their resolve crumbling under the oppressive atmosphere. When they finally encountered Lyria, she was seated upon a throne of twisting roots and glowing fungi. Her eyes locked onto Elric, and she smiled, revealing teeth as sharp as daggers. "You seek to destroy me?" she asked, her voice soft yet menacing. "You cannot destroy what is eternal." Elric raised a vial of a potent alchemical concoction, hurling it at her. The liquid erupted in flames, consuming her throne and the surrounding mushrooms. For a moment, it seemed they had succeeded. But then, from the ashes, she rose, her form now even more terrifying. Her glowing eyes burned with fury, and her laughter shook the forest. "Fools," she hissed, "you cannot kill the forest." One by one, the mercenaries fell, their screams swallowed by the trees. Elric, the last to remain, managed to flee, but not before her spores had taken root in his flesh. He returned to the village, his body and mind slowly succumbing to the forest's curse. The nightmare forest remains, its boundaries ever encroaching upon the village. The glowing maiden's song can be heard on moonless nights, a haunting melody that lures the unwary to their doom. Some say she still sits upon her throne, waiting for the next foolhardy soul to wander into her domain. Others believe she has become the forest itself, her essence woven into every root, every leaf, every glowing mushroom. And so, the villagers live in perpetual fear, their lives overshadowed by the knowledge that the forest is alive, watching and waiting. For those who dare to venture into its depths, there is no escape, only the eternal embrace of the glowing maiden and her fungal kingdom of nightmares. Story 3. The Lord of Flames. In the forgotten corners of the world, where the shadows linger long after the sun has set, there exists a legend whispered only in the darkest hours. A being cloaked in flame and shadow, its face concealed by a cracked white mask with glowing fissures of molten fire. It is not man, nor beast, nor any creature bound by the mortal coil. Known only as the Lord of Flames, it is said to walk the earth in search of souls to consume, an eternal hunter in a world too afraid to confront it. Some say it is the wrath of an ancient god, bound to the mortal realm as punishment. Others claim it is the ghost of a vengeful warrior who defied death itself. Yet all stories agree on one thing. To look into the burning eyes beneath the mask is to invite a fate worse than death. Centuries ago, in a war-torn kingdom forgotten by time, there lived a ruthless general named Kelthar. He was feared across the land for his insatiable hunger for power and his disregard for human life. Cities burned under his command, and rivers ran red with the blood of his enemies. Yet his victories brought him no peace. Kelthar sought not just dominion over men, but mastery over life and death itself. In his pursuit of immortality, Kelthar turned to forbidden texts stolen from a ruined temple. These texts spoke of an ancient ritual that could grant him eternal life, but at a terrible cost. Desperate and blinded by ambition, Kelthar performed the ritual under the light of a blood moon. The ground cracked beneath him as fire erupted from the earth, and a shadowy figure emerged, its voice like the crackling of 1,000 fires. "You seek eternity, mortal?" the figure hissed. "Then eternity you shall have." Kelthar's scream echoed into the night as his body was consumed by flames. When the fire subsided, he was no longer human. His flesh had turned to ash, replaced by molten fire encased in charred armor. A white mask, cracked and glowing with the embers of his torment, was fused to his face. The ritual had succeeded. Kelthar was immortal. But he was cursed to wander the earth, his body a prison of eternal agony, sustained only by the consumption of souls. Kelthar's transformation was not just physical. His mind, once sharp and calculating, began to deteriorate, consumed by the insatiable hunger for souls. He wandered aimlessly at first, leaving trails of ash and smoldering corpses in his wake. Villages burned as he passed through, their inhabitants reduced to charred skeletons. His legend grew quickly. Survivors spoke of a towering figure cloaked in flames, its glowing eyes burning with a hatred that seemed endless. Some claimed they could hear whispers in the wind after he had gone, the voices of the souls he had devoured, begging for release. Others spoke of seeing his victims, their bodies twisted and writhing in the fire that made up his form. But not all feared him. A secret cult, drawn to the destructive power of Kelthar, began to worship him as a god. They offered him sacrifices, hoping to gain his favor. He accepted their offerings, but their reward was not divine. He consumed their souls as he had consumed so many others, leaving their lifeless husks to collapse in the ashes of his passing. The village of Darkhaven was a quiet, unassuming place, nestled at the edge of a dense forest. Its people had heard the stories of Kelthar, but dismissed them as myths. That was until the night the ground beneath the village cracked open, and flames erupted into the sky. Kael'thar emerged from the inferno, his mask glowing with a fiery light that illuminated the terror on the villagers' faces. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if savoring their fear. One by one, the villagers fell, their souls ripped from their bodies and drawn into the vortex of fire at his core. A young woman named Liara, a healer and the village's last hope, refused to flee. She had heard the tales of his origins and believed there might be a way to stop him. Armed with an ancient artifact, a shard of obsidian said to be blessed by the gods, she confronted him in the center of the burning village. "You are not a god," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "You are a curse upon this world." Kael'thar's laughter echoed like an explosion. "You cannot stop me, mortal. Your gods abandoned you long ago." Liara raised the obsidian shard, its surface glowing faintly in the firelight. She plunged it into the ground, and a shockwave of energy burst forth, extinguishing the flames around them. For a moment, it seemed she had succeeded, but Kael'thar merely staggered, his form flickering before re-solidifying. His voice, now a low growl, said, "You have only delayed the inevitable." With a single motion, he consumed Liara, her screams joining the chorus of voices within him. Decades passed, and Kael'thar's legend grew darker. Entire cities fell to his wrath, their streets left in ruins, their people reduced to ashes. The ground where he walked remained scorched, incapable of supporting life. He became a force of nature, unstoppable and unrelenting. But with each soul he consumed, his torment grew. The voices within him became deafening, a cacophony of agony and despair. He could feel their pain, their fear, their hatred. It clawed at his mind, driving him further into madness. Yet he could not stop. The hunger would not allow it. A group of warriors, scholars, and mages, known as the Order of the Black Flame, dedicated their lives to ending Kael'thar's reign of terror. They studied his origins, seeking a way to break the curse. After years of preparation, they lured him to an ancient temple, said to be the site of the original ritual that created him. As Kael'thar entered the temple, the Order activated a series of wards, trapping him within. The leader of the Order, an aged mage named Thalion, confronted him. "Kael'thar, your time has come. We will end your suffering and free the souls you have enslaved." Kael'thar laughed, a sound that shook the very walls of the temple. "You think you can stop me? I am eternal." The Order unleashed their combined power, their magic tearing at his form. For the first time in centuries, Kael'thar felt pain. The flames within him flickered, and the voices grew louder, screaming for release. But as the ritual reached its climax, something went wrong. The power they had unleashed was too great. The temple collapsed, consuming Kael'thar and the Order in a fiery explosion that could be seen for miles. In the aftermath, the ruins of the temple became a forbidden place. A single flame burned at its center, small but impossibly bright. Those who ventured too close claimed to hear whispers emanating from the fire, pleas for mercy, cries of despair, and the ominous laughter of Kael'thar. It is said that the flame cannot be extinguished, for it is bound to the souls of the damned. And on nights when the wind carries the scent of ash, travelers speak of seeing a figure in the distance, a towering form cloaked in fire, its mask glowing with an unholy light. The Lord of Flames lives on, an eternal reminder that some curses can never be broken. And for those who cross his path, there is no salvation, only the cold embrace of the inferno. Story 4. The Woman of the Storm. In a forgotten valley shrouded by mist, there lies a village cursed by its dark history. Known as Black Hollow, the villagers live in constant fear of the stormy nights when thunder roars and lightning splits the sky. On such nights, they speak of her, the woman of the storm, a spectral figure who walks the streets, her presence heralded by the crackle of electricity and the faint scent of burning flesh. They say she is neither alive nor dead, but something in between. Her story is one of betrayal, vengeance, and a curse so malevolent that even the heavens tremble at her fury. To see her is to know your doom, for she does not forgive, and she never forgets. Long ago, Black Hollow was a thriving village. Among its residents was a young woman named Alina, known for her beauty and wisdom. Alina was a healer, skilled in the arts of herbal medicine and midwifery. Despite her kindness, she was an outcast, for the villagers whispered that her abilities were unnatural, a gift from dark forces. The rumors only grew when a series of unexplained deaths began to plague the village. Crops withered, livestock perished, and children fell ill with no apparent cause. Desperate and frightened, the villagers turned their suspicions toward Alina. They claimed her beauty was unnatural, that her remedies were curses, and that she had made a pact with the devil himself. One fateful night, during a terrible storm, the village elders accused Alina of witchcraft. Without trial or evidence, they dragged her to the town square, where they tied her to a wooden stake. The storm raged above as the flames were lit, and as the fire consumed her, Alina screamed not in pain but in rage. "You fools!" she cried. "It is not I who will be cursed, but you. I will return with the storm, and all of you, your children and their children, will suffer for this night." As lightning struck the pyre, her body was consumed in a blinding flash of light. When the storm subsided, nothing remained of Alina but the faint scent of ash and a lingering dread that settled over the village. For a generation, the villagers believed they had rid themselves of Alina and her supposed curses. But one stormy night, decades later, a young boy named Tomas disappeared. His family searched desperately, but all they found was a trail of scorched earth leading to the forest. The villagers whispered that the storm had brought Alina back. The disappearances continued. Each time the storm clouds gathered, another villager would vanish. Witnesses spoke of a pale figure walking through the village, her long, tattered dress billowing in the wind, and her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. They said she moved with the grace of the living, but the silence of the dead. The elders, desperate to appease her, began leaving offerings at the edge of the village. Food, trinkets, even animals. But the disappearances did not stop. Alina's vengeance was not one that could be bought. It was a hunger that could not be sated. By the time Liana was born, the legend of Alina had become a grim bedtime story. But Liana did not believe in ghosts or curses. She was a strong-willed young woman who refused to live in fear. When her younger brother disappeared during a storm, Liana vowed to put an end to the terror that gripped her village. Liana began to investigate the history of Alina. She discovered an old journal belonging to her great-grandmother, a midwife who had tried to defend Alina all those years ago. The journal spoke of a sacred relic, an obsidian dagger imbued with protective charms, said to be capable of severing the bond between the living and the dead. On the next stormy night, Liana armed herself with the dagger and waited. As the first bolt of lightning illuminated the sky, she saw her, a tall, spectral figure with pale skin and eyes that glowed like embers. Alina's dress was charred and tattered, and her presence exuded a cold that seemed to sap the life from the air. "You dare to confront me?" Alina's voice was a low hiss carried on the wind. "I'm here to end this," Liana replied, her voice trembling but resolute. Alina's laughter echoed through the storm. "You cannot end what you do not understand. Your ancestors doomed you all, and now you will join them." Liana and Alina faced off in the heart of the village, the storm raging around them. Alina's movements were swift and unnatural, her hands crackling with electric energy. Liana fought to keep her courage, using the dagger to deflect Alina's attacks. As the battle raged, Liana realized that the storm itself was connected to Alina's power. The angrier Alina became, the more violent the weather grew. Liana remembered the journal's words. To sever the bond, one must face the eye of the storm. With no other choice, Liana plunged the dagger into the ground and recited the incantation she had memorized. A blinding light erupted, and the storm ceased. Alina let out an unearthly scream as her form began to dissipate, her glowing eyes fixed on Liana. "This is not the end," Alina hissed. "I will return, and when I do, there will be no one left to stop me." With a final flash of lightning, Alina was gone, leaving behind only silence. The villagers celebrated Liana as a hero, but she felt no triumph. She could still hear Alina's final words echoing in her mind. Over time, the village began to rebuild, and the storms became less frequent. But Liana knew better than to believe the curse was truly broken. Years later, on the anniversary of Alina's death, Liana awoke to the sound of thunder. Stepping outside, she saw a single bolt of lightning strike the center of the village square. When she approached, she found the dagger she had used, its blade blackened and its protective runes faded. As she picked it up, a familiar chill ran down her spine. In the distance, through the pouring rain, she saw her. Alina standing at the edge of the village, her glowing eyes burning brighter than ever. The storm had returned, and this time, it would not be stopped. The story of Black Hollow became one of eternal fear, for the villagers knew that no matter how many generations passed, the woman of the storm would always come back. Her vengeance never satisfied, her curse never lifted. And so, the cycle of terror continued, each bolt of lightning a harbinger of doom, each gust of wind carrying the whispers of her wrath. Story 5. The Mark of Asmodara. In the heart of an ancient, forgotten kingdom, a prophecy whispered through the halls of time like a deadly curse. It spoke of a being born under a blood-red moon, marked with symbols of hell's dominion. This creature, half human, half demon, would rise to consume the light and drown the world in eternal darkness. The name etched into the annals of terror was Asmodara. In the village of Black Vale, nestled within the shadow of jagged mountains, fear had become a way of life. The people prayed fervently to gods who no longer listened, hoping to stave off the prophecy. But their prayers went unanswered, and the blood moon rose. On the night of the blood moon, a child was born to a farmer and his wife. The midwife gasped as the infant emerged, her skin pale as marble, her eyes a piercing crimson. A mark stretched across her forehead, an intricate sigil that glowed faintly in the moonlight. The parents named her Elira, but they knew from the moment of her birth that she was not like other children. Whispers spread through Blackvale like wildfire. The villagers, consumed by superstition and fear, demanded the child be cast out. Her parents, though terrified, refused. They swore to protect her, even as the air around their home grew heavy with dread. As Elira grew, strange occurrences followed her. Crops withered where she walked, and animals refused to approach her. On her 10th birthday, a thunderstorm erupted without warning, and lightning struck the village square, igniting a fire that consumed half the town. The villagers accused Elira of witchcraft, claiming the mark on her forehead was a sigil of the devil. Her parents, unable to protect her any longer, handed her over to the village elders, who banished her to the cursed ruins of an ancient temple deep within the woods. The ruins of the temple were shrouded in perpetual twilight. Vines choked the crumbling stone, and the air smelled of decay. Left alone, Elira wandered the desolate halls, her fear giving way to a strange sense of belonging. It was there, beneath the cracked dome of the temple, that she heard the voice for the first time. "Child of the blood moon," it whispered, soft and insidious. "You are mine." Elira fell to her knees as the voice filled her mind. Shadows coalesced before her, forming the figure of a horned entity with eyes that burned like molten lava. The demon's voice dripped with malice and seduction. "You have been chosen," it said. "You carry my mark. Together we shall reclaim this world and reshape it in our image." Elira tried to resist, but the demon's power was overwhelming. As the mark on her forehead began to glow brighter, the sigils etched into her skin spread, pulsating with unholy energy. Her screams echoed through the temple as her humanity was stripped away, replaced by the dark essence of Asmodara. When Elira emerged from the temple, she was no longer the frightened girl the villagers had cast out. Her skin glistened with infernal runes, and her eyes blazed with hellfire. Her presence radiated an aura of dread, and the ground beneath her feet blackened with every step. She returned to Blackvale under the cover of night. The villagers awoke to the sound of screams as shadows consumed their homes. Elira walked through the chaos, her voice ringing with otherworldly power. "You cast me out," she declared. "Now you shall face the wrath of the Forsaken." One by one, the villagers fell, their bodies reduced to ash, their souls torn from their flesh and absorbed into the burning sigils that adorned Elira's body. The few who survived fled into the wilderness, spreading tales of the demon who had risen to fulfill the prophecy. Asmodara's power grew with each soul consumed, and soon his presence was felt far beyond Blackvale. A cult formed in his name, drawn by the promise of power and eternal life. They worshipped Elira as a goddess, offering sacrifices to feed her insatiable hunger. With every life taken, the sigils on her body glowed brighter, and the ground trembled beneath her feet. The kingdom fell into chaos. Entire cities were consumed by darkness, their inhabitants turned into mindless husks that marched under Elira's command. The sun grew dim, and the skies were perpetually overcast, as if the heavens themselves had abandoned the world. Desperate to stop the spread of darkness, a group of warriors and scholars, known as the Order of the Light, banded together. They unearthed ancient texts that spoke of a weapon forged by the gods, a blade capable of severing the bond between Asmodara and his vessel. The weapon, known as the Dawn Spire, was hidden deep within the ruins of an ancient citadel. The Order's leader, a warrior named Kale, led an expedition to retrieve the blade. After weeks of perilous journey, they found the Dawn Spire, its blade shimmering with divine light. Armed with the weapon, Kale and his companions set out to confront Elira. They found her atop a mountain of bones, surrounded by her cultists. The battle was fierce, with Kale's warriors falling one by one to Elira's dark magic. As Kale faced her alone, the Dawn Spire clashed against her fiery claws, its light dimming with each strike. "You cannot kill me," Elira hissed. "I am eternal." With a final desperate effort, Kale drove the Dawn Spire into her heart. The sigils on her body flared violently, and a deafening scream erupted as the bond between Elira and Asmodara was shattered. Her body disintegrated into ash, and the mountain trembled as the ground swallowed her remains. The Order believed they had won, but their victory was short-lived. Though Elira's body was destroyed, the mark of Asmodara remained. The sigils, now scattered across the land, began to appear on the bodies of newborns, a grim reminder that the demon's influence was far from eradicated. Years later, on a moonless night, a child was born in a distant village. As the midwife wrapped the infant in a blanket, she noticed a faint glow on the child's forehead, a sigil she had only seen in nightmares. The winds outside howled, and a deep, guttural laugh echoed through the night. Asmodara had not been defeated. He had merely been waiting, his essence spreading like a plague, ensuring that one day the world would once again burn under his dominion. And so, the cycle began anew, each generation more cursed than the last, as the shadow of Asmodara loomed ever larger over the world. Story 6. The Devourer of Souls. In the dark heart of a forgotten world, where mist clings to the ground like the breath of the dead, lies the cursed forest of Darkspire. Among its twisted trees and blackened soil, villagers tell tales of a creature so horrifying that even the bravest dare not speak its name aloud. It is said to be a remnant of a forgotten age, a monstrosity born from dark rituals, with the power to consume not just life, but the very essence of the soul. They call it the Devourer of Souls. No one who enters Darkspire has ever returned whole. Some vanish without a trace, while others are found as empty shells, their bodies intact, but their eyes hollow, their souls torn away. And then there are the whispers, carried on the wind like a plague, driving the unlucky few who hear them into madness. But the true terror lies not in the stories. It lies in the fact that the Devourer is real. Centuries ago, Darkspire was a prosperous land, its forests lush and its people thriving. That was before the arrival of Malrik, a sorcerer whose hunger for power was matched only by his cruelty. Malrik sought to harness the forces of the abyss itself, and in his arrogance, he performed a ritual forbidden even among the darkest of magicians. Using the blood of the innocent and the words of the damned, Malrik tore open a rift between realms. From the chasm crawled a being unlike any other, a creature of pure malice and insatiable hunger, bound by neither life nor death. It was a towering abomination, its body twisted and writhing, with a maw that seemed to stretch into eternity. Its spine was adorned with human skulls, fused to its flesh as trophies of its eternal hunt. But Malrik's triumph was short-lived. The creature turned on its summoner, tearing Malrik's soul from his body and devouring it. Freed from the sorcerer's control, the Devourer of Souls claimed Darkspire as its domain, transforming the once vibrant forest into a shadowy graveyard of despair. Generations passed, and Darkspire became a place of legend, a warning whispered to children to keep them from straying too far. But not everyone heeded the warnings. Those who ventured too close spoke of a chilling presence, an oppressive silence broken only by faint whispers in a language no human could understand. Elias, a hunter from a nearby village, was one of the few who dared enter the forest. He returned 3 days later, his hair white as snow and his eyes filled with unspeakable terror. "It's real," he whispered to the gathered villagers. "The stories are true. I saw it. Its maw. It swallowed them whole. Their screams. They're still inside it." Elias's account sent shockwaves through the village. He described the creature as a towering figure, its body an amalgamation of sinew and shadow, adorned with skulls that seemed to watch him as he fled. He spoke of its maw, a gaping abyss lined with jagged teeth, from which emanated the faint cries of its victims, eternally trapped within. The villagers, gripped by fear, abandoned their homes closest to the forest, leaving Darkspire to its monstrous guardian. Over time, the Devourer's influence began to extend beyond the borders of Darkspire. Crops failed in neighboring villages, and livestock were found mutilated, their eyes empty and lifeless. People began disappearing during the night, their homes left undisturbed but with an eerie silence lingering in the air. Those brave or foolish enough to investigate claimed to hear whispers emanating from the forest, pleas for help, cries of agony, and faint laughter that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The whispers drove some to madness, their minds unraveling as they babbled incoherently about the horrors they had seen. In a desperate bid to end the curse, the villagers turned to an ancient text hidden in the ruins of a long-abandoned church. The text spoke of a way to banish the creature, but the ritual required a human sacrifice, a willing soul to confront the devourer and seal it away. Among the villagers was Celine, a young woman whose family had been claimed by the forest. Determined to end the nightmare, Celine volunteered for the ritual. Armed with an obsidian dagger said to hold the essence of light itself, she ventured into Darkspire under the watchful eyes of the remaining villagers. As she entered the forest, the air grew colder and the whispers grew louder. Shadows danced among the trees, and the ground seemed to writhe beneath her feet. Finally, she reached the heart of the forest, where the devourer awaited. The creature loomed over her, its grotesque form pulsating with dark energy. Its maw opened, revealing rows of teeth that glistened like blackened steel. And from within came the cries of countless souls, their agony palpable. "You dare challenge me?" it hissed, its voice a cacophony of torment. "I am eternal, I am hunger, you are nothing." Celine gripped the dagger tightly, her hands trembling but her resolve unshaken. She recited the incantation from the ancient text, her voice cutting through the whispers like a blade. The sigils etched into the dagger began to glow, and a beam of light pierced the darkness, striking the devourer. The creature howled in pain, its body convulsing as the light burned through it. But as Celine pressed forward, the whispers grew deafening, and the shadows around her came alive, clawing at her flesh and mind. With a final scream, Celine drove the dagger into the devourer's heart. The forest erupted in light, and the creature's form began to disintegrate. But as it dissolved, its maw opened one last time, and a torrent of souls poured out, swirling around Celine before vanishing into the ether. The villagers, watching from afar, saw the light fade and dared to hope that the curse had been lifted. But when Celine emerged from the forest, they realized the truth. Her eyes burned with the same fiery glow as the devourer's, and the whispers that had once haunted the forest now followed her. "It is done," she said, her voice a haunting echo. "But the hunger remains." Celine had become the new vessel for the devourer's essence. Though the creature was destroyed, its curse lived on within her. As she walked away from the village, the ground blackened beneath her feet, and the whispers spread, infecting the minds of those who listened. Darkspire remains a place of fear and desolation, but its curse is no longer confined to the forest. Celine, now a harbinger of the darkness, wanders the land, her presence bringing despair and death. Villages fall silent in her wake, their inhabitants claimed by the whispers that herald her arrival. And in the dead of night, when the wind howls and the shadows grow long, you might hear them too. The voices of the damned, crying out from the abyss, as the devourer's hunger continues, eternal and unrelenting. Story 7. The Devil's Musician. In a forgotten corner of the world lies Hollow Creek, a village cloaked in eternal fog, where the air is heavy with whispers of the damned. Among the villagers, there is one story they all fear to tell. A story of a figure who sits in the shadows, cradling a guitar that sings the songs of despair. They call him the Devil's Musician. It is said that his music can draw you in, piercing through your very soul. Those who hear the melody are compelled to follow it, to seek the source of the haunting sound. But none who enter the house where he resides ever return. Some say he devours their souls. Others claim he traps them within his guitar, turning them into notes of his infernal symphony. This is not just a legend. This is the story of Gideon, the man who became the devil's minstrel, and the eternal curse he spreads through his unholy music. Decades ago, Gideon was just a man, a struggling musician. He roamed from town to town, his guitar slung across his back, his pockets perpetually empty. Though his talent was undeniable, his songs never reached the ears of those who could grant him fame. His melodies, no matter how heartfelt, were drowned out by the noise of the world. One night, after yet another failed performance, Gideon sat by a desolate riverbank strumming his guitar. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the water. As his fingers danced across the strings, a voice spoke from the darkness. "Your music is beautiful, but it is meaningless in this world." Startled, Gideon turned to see a tall figure standing behind him. The man's eyes burned like embers, and his smile revealed teeth sharp as knives. He was dressed impeccably, but there was an air of otherworldly menace about him. "Who are you?" Gideon stammered. "A fan of your work," the figure replied. "And perhaps a benefactor. I can give you what you desire most: fame, fortune, adoration. In exchange, all I ask is your soul when your time comes." Gideon hesitated. He had heard tales of deals with the devil, but desperation clouded his judgment. "What use is my soul if I'm destined to die in obscurity anyway?" he thought. And so, he shook the man's hand, sealing the pact. The change was immediate. The moment Gideon picked up his guitar, the melodies that flowed from it were unlike anything he had ever played. His fingers moved with supernatural precision, and his voice carried a haunting beauty that left listeners spellbound. Audiences grew wherever he performed, and soon his name spread far and wide. Gideon's songs seemed to touch something deep within people, evoking emotions they didn't know they had. But there was a dark undercurrent to his music. Those who listened too closely spoke of nightmares that lingered for days. Others claimed to hear whispers in the background of his songs, voices calling out for help. Despite the rumors, Gideon's fame grew. He performed in grand halls, where the wealthy and powerful flocked to hear him play. Yet, with each performance, he felt a growing unease. The embers of the pact burned brighter in his mind, and he began to notice shadows moving where there should be none, whispers that echoed in empty rooms. One fateful night, after a sold-out performance, Gideon returned to his lavish home. The house was silent, but a cold wind blew through the halls. As he entered his music room, he found the man from the riverbank sitting in his chair, strumming his guitar. "It's time," the man said, his voice like the creak of an old door. "Our deal is complete." Gideon pleaded, begged for more time, but the man merely laughed. "You have had your fame, your fortune. Now your soul belongs to me." In a last-ditch effort, Gideon grabbed his guitar and began to play. The melody was desperate, filled with anguish and regret. To his surprise, the man paused, listening intently. "Interesting," the man said. "Very well, Gideon. I will grant you one last chance. Continue to play, but know this: your music will no longer be yours. It will be mine. And through it, you shall spread my darkness." Before Gideon could protest, the man snapped his fingers, and Gideon's body was consumed by shadows. When he awoke, he was no longer human. His skin was gray and leathery, his fingers clawed. His guitar, once a simple instrument, now pulsed with a malevolent energy. And his eyes burned like the man's, fiery portals to a realm of torment. Gideon, now the devil's musician, roams the world, drawn to places of despair and sorrow. His music, once a source of hope, is now a weapon of darkness. Those who hear it are ensnared, their souls pulled from their bodies and trapped within his guitar. The strings of the instrument hum with the cries of the damned, each note a fragment of a life consumed. In Hollow Creek, the legend of the musician grows. People speak of hearing his music on windless nights, a haunting melody that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere. Those who follow the sound are never seen again, their screams echoing faintly in the distance. One stormy night, a young woman named Clara, desperate to save her dying father, heard the melody. Her father, once a musician himself, had always told her of the legend of the devil's musician. But Clara, consumed by grief, believed that if she could find him, she might bargain for her father's life. She followed the sound to an abandoned house at the edge of the village. Inside, Gideon sat, his twisted form barely recognizable as human. His guitar glowed faintly, and as he played, the room seemed to pulse with a dark energy. "You've come to make a deal," he said without looking up. His voice was deep, layered with the echoes of countless trapped souls. Clara nodded. "I'll give you anything. Just save my father." Gideon paused, his fiery eyes meeting hers. For a moment, there was something human in his gaze, a flicker of the man he once was. But then he smiled, and the humanity was gone. "Very well," he said. "But remember, all deals come at a price." The next morning, Clara's father awoke, healthy and alive. But Clara was gone. The villagers found the abandoned house empty, save for Gideon's guitar propped against the wall. Its strings hummed softly, as if played by invisible hands, and faintly, they could hear her voice among the notes, crying out for help. To this day, the devil's musician continues to play, his guitar carrying the weight of countless souls. And if you ever hear his melody on a quiet night, resist the urge to follow it. For once you step into his world, there is no escape. Story 8. The Visitor in the Night Deep. In the heart of a desolate valley lies a village shrouded in perpetual mist, a place forgotten by time. In this village, a tale has been passed down through generations, whispered only in hushed tones after dark. It tells of a figure that appears on moonlit nights, cloaked in black, with a skeletal face and hollow eyes that seem to pierce the soul. This figure, known only as the Visitor, is said to come for children, but not to harm them. Instead, he comes to speak, to listen, and to claim something far worse than their lives. This is the story of Clara, the girl who dared to meet the Visitor, and the terror that followed her through life. Clara was just 7 years old when she first heard the whispers. It began as a faint sound, like the rustling of leaves in the wind. But it grew louder each night. The whispers seemed to come from the shadows in her room, from the darkest corners where the light of her small lantern couldn't reach. Her mother dismissed it as the overactive imagination of a lonely child. "There's nothing in the dark that isn't there in the light," her mother would say. But Clara knew better. The whispers were real, and they were getting closer. One night, as she lay awake in her small bed, the whispers stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, a heavy stillness that made the air feel too thick to breathe. And then, she saw him. In the corner of her room, illuminated by the pale light of the moon, stood the Visitor. His skeletal face was partially obscured by the hood of his black cloak, but his eyes, hollow, yet somehow burning with a dim, otherworldly light, locked onto hers. He carried a massive scythe, its blade glinting faintly in the darkness. Clara wanted to scream, but no sound came. The Visitor tilted his head, as if studying her. Then, in a voice that was both a whisper and a roar, he spoke. "You do not fear me." Clara, her voice trembling, managed to whisper back, "Should I?" A hint of what might have been a smile played across the skeletal face. "Most do, but you are different. That is why I am here." The visitor sat at the edge of Clara's bed, the weight of his presence making the mattress dip slightly. "I am not here to take you," he said. "Not yet. I am here to talk." Clara's fear gave way to curiosity. "Why me?" she asked. "Because you can hear the whispers," the visitor replied. "Few can, and fewer still are brave enough to answer them. You are special, Clara, and I need your help." He explained that he was not death itself, but a herald, a collector of souls. His task was eternal, unchanging, and unbearably lonely. For centuries he had wandered the world, speaking only to the dying and the damned. Clara was the first living soul who had ever truly seen him. "Each night, when the moon is full, I will return," he said. "You will listen to my stories, and in return, I will protect you from the things that lurk in the shadows." Clara, feeling a strange mix of fear and pity, agreed. "But there is one rule," the visitor warned. "You must never speak of me to anyone. If you do, the protection I offer will be broken, and the shadows will come for you." Clara nodded, and with that, the visitor disappeared, leaving behind only the faintest scent of decay. Over the years, the visitor kept his word. On nights when the moon was full, he would appear in Clara's room, his massive frame filling the small space. He told her stories, terrible, haunting tales of the souls he had collected. Each story was more horrifying than the last. A man who had sold his soul for power, only to be betrayed by those he trusted most. A woman who had been consumed by her own greed, her soul now trapped in a gilded cage for eternity. A child whose innocence had been twisted into something monstrous. As Clara grew older, she began to understand the true nature of the visitor's task. He was not merely a collector of souls. He was a witness to humanity's darkest impulses, a chronicler of their sins. And through his stories, Clara felt the weight of the world's suffering pressing down on her. But the visitor was true to his word. No harm ever came to Clara, no matter how dark the nights or how loud the whispers in the shadows grew. When Clara was 16, her mother fell gravely ill. Desperate and frightened, Clara broke the visitor's one rule. She told her mother about him, hoping that he might intervene, might somehow save her. That night, the visitor appeared, but he was different. His hollow eyes burned with fury, and the air around him crackled with an energy that made Clara's skin crawl. "You broke our pact," he said, his voice a low growl that shook the walls. "You spoke of me." "I didn't mean to," Clara pleaded. I wanted to save her." The visitor loomed over her, his skeletal face inches from hers. "I warned you what would happen," he said. "The protection I gave you is gone, and now the shadows will come." The first night after the pact was broken, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent than ever. Clara's room grew colder, the shadows darker. She saw movement in the corners of her vision, fleeting shapes that disappeared when she turned to look. By the third night, the whispers had become screams. Her mother, too weak to leave her bed, began to cry out in terror, claiming to see figures standing at the foot of her bed. And on the seventh night, the shadows came. They poured into the house like a living tide, their forms writhing and shapeless. Clara tried to run, but they caught her, their cold, insubstantial hands dragging her to the ground. Her mother's screams echoed through the house, then abruptly stopped. As the shadows closed in, the visitor appeared, his scythe cutting through the darkness like a blade of light. For a moment, Clara thought he had come to save her. But as the shadows retreated, he turned to her, his hollow eyes filled with sorrow. "This is not salvation," he said. "This is punishment." Clara awoke in her bed, but something was different. The room was cold, and the shadows seemed to press in closer than ever. She looked down at her hands and saw that they were pale, almost translucent. The visitor stood at the foot of her bed, his scythe resting against the floor. "You are no longer among the living," he said. "Your soul now belongs to the shadows, but I have taken pity on you. Instead of being consumed, you will take my place." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Why?" she whispered. "Because I am tired," the visitor replied, "and because you listened when no one else would." He placed the scythe in her trembling hands. "This is your burden now. You will collect the souls of the damned. You will walk among the shadows, and you will be alone. Forever." As the visitor faded into the darkness, Clara felt the weight of the scythe grow heavier in her hands, and for the first time, she understood the true cost of breaking a pact with the shadows. To this day, the villagers of the desolate valley speak of a new visitor. She is smaller, her face hidden beneath a hood, but her eyes burn with the same hollow light. And when she comes, she brings with her the whispers of the damned, a melody of sorrow and despair. And if you hear those whispers, pray that she does not stop at your door, for once you see her, there is no escape. Story 9. The Shadow Bearer. Far from the reach of sunlight, buried deep in the misty wilderness of Blackmoor, lies a village shrouded in an eternal curse. Its inhabitants speak in hushed tones of an entity that walks among the fog, a figure cloaked in tattered robes, surrounded by an unholy swarm of bats. Known only as the Shadow Bearer, it is said to bring despair, death, and darkness wherever it treads. No one knows where it came from or why it haunts the lands. Some claim it is a herald of the apocalypse, others that it is a forsaken soul cursed to wander for eternity. But all agree on one thing: those who see it are never the same, and those who hear its whispers are forever lost. This is the story of Eliza, the girl who met the Shadow Bearer and uncovered the horrifying truth of her family's past, and the curse she could never escape. Eliza grew up hearing tales of the Shadow Bearer. Her grandmother, a stern woman with sharp eyes, would often warn her, "Never stray into the mist after dusk. That's when the shadows walk, and the bearer seeks what it's owed." But Eliza, like all children, dismissed these warnings as superstitions. The village elders were always speaking of curses and spirits, trying to frighten the younger generation into obedience. It wasn't until her 16th year that she realized the truth. One cold autumn night, as the village was cloaked in thick fog, Eliza's curiosity got the better of her. She ventured out into the woods, her lantern cutting through the oppressive mist. The air was unnaturally still, and the only sound was the crunch of leaves beneath her boots. That's when she heard it. A faint, melodic whisper. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, weaving through the trees like a living thing. It called her name, soft but insistent, drawing her deeper into the forest. Eliza. Her heart raced as she followed the sound, each step taking her further from the safety of the village. And then she saw it. A figure standing in the clearing, shrouded in a cloak of shadows, surrounded by a swirling storm of bats. Its face was hidden beneath a hood, but its presence radiated cold, unrelenting dread. "You came," it said, its voice like 1,000 whispers layered atop one another. "I have been waiting for you." Eliza froze, unable to move or speak. The figure stepped closer, and the bats scattered briefly before returning to circle around it. Its hand emerged from beneath its cloak, pale and skeletal, pointing directly at her. "Do you know who I am?" it asked. You're the Shadow Bearer," Eliza stammered. "Yes, it replied, its voice carrying a hint of satisfaction. "And you are the last of her bloodline." Confused and terrified, Eliza demanded to know what it meant. The shadow bearer began to tell its story, its words weaving images in her mind like a dreadful dream. Centuries ago, Blackmoor had been a thriving settlement, ruled by a powerful sorceress named Lyriel. She had used her magic to protect the village from famine and disease, demanding loyalty in return. But her power and independence frightened the elders, who accused her of witchcraft. The villagers turned on her, dragging her to the center of the square and burning her at the stake. As the flames consumed her, Lyriel cast a curse upon the village. "My blood will return, and with it, the darkness I command. You shall not escape the shadows, nor the bearer of your guilt." The shadow bearer was born from that curse, a manifestation of her vengeance. And Eliza, Lyriel's distant descendant, was the key to ending it, or to unleashing its full fury. The shadow bearer told Eliza that the curse had weakened over the years, but only because it had been waiting for her. As the last of Lyriel's bloodline, she could choose to fulfill her ancestors' vengeance or to end the cycle of darkness. "But know this," it warned, "no choice comes without a price. If you end the curse, the shadows will take you as their vessel. If you fulfill it, the village will fall into eternal night, and you will rule over its ashes." Eliza felt the weight of the decision crushing her. The village had always treated her with kindness, but they had also harbored secrets, whispering about her family's dark history. Could she condemn them to the same fate they had inflicted upon Lyriel? Could she sacrifice herself to save them? "I need time to think," she pleaded. The shadow bearer nodded. "I will return tomorrow night. Choose wisely, Eliza. Your choice will echo through eternity." Desperate for answers, Eliza confronted her grandmother, who had always seemed to know more than she let on. After much coaxing, the old woman revealed the truth. "Yes, you are of Lyriel's blood," she admitted. "But so am I, and so were your mother and her mother before her. Every generation, the shadow bearer comes for one of us. And every generation, we choose to let the curse linger, hoping it will one day fade." Eliza felt betrayed. "You mean you've all been passing this burden down, hoping someone else would deal with it?" Her grandmother's silence was answer enough. Furious and heartbroken, Eliza realized that the decision was now hers alone. She spent the entire day wrestling with her options, torn between self-sacrifice and vengeance. When night fell, the fog returned, thicker than ever. Eliza made her way to the clearing, where the shadow bearer awaited her. The bats circled overhead, their screeches blending with the whispers that filled the air. "Have you decided?" it asked. Eliza hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Finally, she spoke. "I choose to end the curse." The shadow bearer tilted its head as if surprised. "Then step forward," it said, extending its hand. Eliza approached, her heart pounding. As she placed her hand in its skeletal grip, a surge of cold darkness enveloped her. The bats descended, their wings slicing through the air, and the whispers grew into a deafening roar. For a brief moment, she felt as though she was falling into an endless void. And then, silence. When the villagers awoke the next morning, the fog had lifted and the sun shone brighter than it had in years. For the first time in generations, the curse seemed to be broken, but Eliza was nowhere to be found. Some say she had been taken by the shadows, her soul consumed as the price for their salvation. Others whispered that she had become something else entirely, a new shadow bearer, bound to wander the earth as her ancestors' replacement. In the dead of night, when the moon is full, some claim to see a figure cloaked in darkness walking the edge of the forest, bats swirling around her. And if you listen closely, you can hear the faint sound of whispers calling your name. The curse may be broken, but the shadows never truly leave. Story 10. The House of the Crawling Horror. In the remote village of Blackmore, nestled deep within a foggy valley, there stands a house that no one dares to enter. Known only as the Twisted House, its walls seem to lean unnaturally, as if the very structure is alive and writhing in agony. The villagers whisper tales of strange noises emanating from within, scraping, screeching, and an eerie, high-pitched laughter that chills the bones. But the most terrifying tale is of the creature that resides there. A woman with limbs grotesquely elongated and bent at impossible angles, her body contorted as if broken and rebuilt by some malevolent force. Her milky white eyes see everything, and her wide, razor-toothed smile is said to haunt the dreams of those who come too close. This is the story of three friends who dared to step inside the house and the unspeakable horrors they unleashed. Ethan, Mia, and Caleb were inseparable, the kind of friends who thrived on pushing boundaries. One chilly autumn evening, as the trio sat around a campfire, the conversation turned to the Twisted House. "It's all just stupid village gossip," Mia scoffed, tossing a twig into the flames. "There's no such thing as haunted houses." "Yeah?" Caleb replied, his voice trembling slightly. "Then why hasn't anyone gone inside and come back to talk about it?" Ethan, the self-appointed leader of their group, grinned. "Because they're cowards, but we're not. Let's prove them wrong." Before Caleb could protest, Mia had already agreed. The plan was set. They would enter the house at midnight and stay for an hour. If nothing happened, they would leave triumphant. But deep down, even Ethan felt a knot of unease in his stomach. The house loomed before them like a sleeping beast, its windows dark and lifeless, its wooden walls warped and covered in moss. As they stepped onto the creaking porch, a chill ran through the air, colder than the night itself. Ethan pushed the door open, the hinges groaning like a dying animal. The interior was suffocatingly dark, and the air carried the stench of decay. Mia turned on her flashlight, its beam cutting through the shadows to reveal peeling wallpaper, broken furniture, and claw marks gouged into the walls. "This place is disgusting," Mia muttered. "Let's just look around and get out of here." As they moved deeper into the house, the floorboards creaked beneath their weight. Caleb, lagging behind, froze when he heard a faint sound, a rhythmic scratching, like nails dragging against wood. "Guys, did you hear that?" he whispered. "It's probably rats," Ethan replied dismissively. But the sound grew louder, and soon it was accompanied by another noise, a soft, wheezing breath that seemed to come from everywhere at once. They entered a large, dilapidated room, its walls covered in strange, indecipherable symbols. At its center lay a mirror, cracked and grimy, but still reflecting the room around it. As Mia stepped closer, her flashlight flickered, and the scratching stopped abruptly. In the silence, a voice echoed from the shadows, low and guttural yet distinctly female. "You shouldn't have come." The mirror's surface rippled, and from the darkness behind them emerged a figure. It moved unnaturally, its limbs twisted and elongated, crawling on all fours with horrifying speed. Its head tilted at an impossible angle, and its eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. Mia screamed as the creature lunged, its bony fingers raking across the floor. Ethan grabbed her arm, pulling her back as Caleb froze in terror. "Run!" Ethan shouted. The three of them bolted down the hallway, but the house seemed to shift around them. Doors that had been open slammed shut, and walls appeared where none had been moments before. The creature's laughter echoed through the halls, a chilling, high-pitched cackle that grew louder with each step. "This isn't possible," Caleb cried, tears streaming down his face. Houses don't move. Tell that to her, Mia snapped, her breath ragged as they turned a corner and found themselves back in the room with the mirror. The creature was waiting for them, perched on the ceiling like a spider. It grinned, revealing a mouth full of jagged teeth. "Stay with me," it whispered. "Forever." Desperate, Ethan grabbed a broken piece of wood and swung it at the creature. It screeched, recoiling momentarily, but the attack only seemed to enrage it. The lights flickered wildly as it lunged again, its claws slashing through the air. "Go!" Ethan yelled, shoving Mia and Caleb toward a door that had reappeared. "I'll hold it off." "No!" Mia screamed, but Caleb dragged her away, tears streaming down his face. Ethan turned back to face the creature, his hands trembling but resolute. "Come on, you twisted freak. Let's finish this." The last thing Mia saw before the door slammed shut was the creature descending upon Ethan, its laughter echoing in her ears. Mia and Caleb stumbled out of the house just as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon. They collapsed on the ground, gasping for air, their minds reeling from the horrors they had witnessed. But the house was silent now, its twisted walls standing motionless as if nothing had happened. Ethan was gone, and they knew they could never return to find him. Over the following weeks, both Mia and Caleb began to experience strange phenomena. They heard scratching noises at night, and sometimes, when they looked in mirrors, they saw a twisted figure standing just behind them. Caleb couldn't take it. One night, he vanished, leaving only a note that read, "She's calling me." Mia tried to move on, but the nightmares never stopped. She dreamed of Ethan, his face pale and his body contorted, crawling toward her with a twisted smile. And in every dream, she heard the creature's voice. "You can't escape." Years later, the twisted house still stands, its walls warped and covered in moss. Brave souls occasionally dare to enter, lured by curiosity or disbelief in the legends. None of them ever return. And if you stand outside the house on a quiet night, you might hear it. The sound of nails scratching against wood, the faint echo of laughter, and a whisper that chills the blood. "Come closer, I've been waiting for you."